As has been said over these last days, it can be repeated that in the way of stories, we've been exploring the location that it is said that we arrive at when we no longer need to try to understand, to try to heal or change, to try to be this or that. But to recap a little, just to connect the stories that have been told. There was a story told the other day that had this summation at its end, which was speaking through the prophet Kadir, who said, when one attains to mystical knowledge, one attains an objective knowledge of the world. And knowing this, it is realized that when one displays saintliness or mystical knowledge, you draw to you those who are only seeking the power of mysticism and repel those who are really seeking truth. So that leads us into the question, have we ever looked at the meaning of the words subjective and objective? If we do, we realize that subjectivity is of the mind, subject to opinions, conditioning, thoughts, trying, and objectivity. An objective reality is one without opinions, without colour, without any imposition of conditioned mind. So, with this in mind, seeing the threads of these stories, there's a simple story that allows us to ask a question again that perhaps brings up a deeper understanding of where we are. And it's a story about a goat herd who every day took his little herd of goats up to the mountain to graze. But it so happened that this goat herd was completely deaf. But that didn't bother him at all, because every day he took his little herd of goats up to the mountain and sat ruminating while the goats fed. But it happened one day that his wife was ill and did not pack his little lunch box with his bread and cheese and his flask of cider. So when he was up on the hillside and the noontime came and the hunger pangs came, he suddenly realized that he didn't have any food, so he would have to go back down the hill again to his house. But then he looked over and he saw in a field nearby that there was a farmer gathering hay for his animals on his farm. So the goat herd went over to the farmer and said to him, look, I'm so sorry, but my wife has omitted to give me my lunchbox with my bread and cheese, and I just have to go down because I'm hungry and thirsty, and I wonder, would you mind looking after my goats while I'm away? Well, it so happened that this farmer was totally deaf also, and so he replied, can't you see that I'm busy? I've got hay to rake for my animals. I haven't got time to look after your goats. And the goat herd said, well, thank you very much. I won't be very long. So he went down the mountain and fetched his lunchbox and came back and counted all his goats, and all his goats were there. So he was very, very thankful to the farmer. So he thought to himself, well, I've got this little lame goat. I'll just give it to him as a gift and thanks for taking care of my goats so well. So he carried the little goat over to the farmer, who was still raking up his hay, and the goat herd was going to hand over the little goat to the farmer, and the farmer said, I don't know what happened to your goat. How do I know what? I have no interest in what. I don't. And there was a big altercation that goes on. There was arguing back and forth about what it was, and it got quite heated. And so they happened to see that there was a horse rider going by, so they stopped him from riding his horse, hailed him down, and they were both speaking at once about what their story was. But it so happened the horse rider was deaf also. And he said, yes, I know I stole the horse, but it was because... And then they all got into this terrible waving arms around all over the place and arguing with one another. And then along comes the road, along down the road comes this dervish. Well, you know, in the way of dervishes, they kind of have a presence about them, which for some people is quite, distressing, because, they think that they've got this evil eye, the way of fakirs and the magicians and all of that. But, when they're all arguing, they thought, well, these dervishes, they're supposed to have knowledge and mystic, so they all decided that they were going to put it to the dervish about what was going on. They were all speaking at once, the farmer and the goat herd and the rider, they're all speaking at once to the dervish. Well, the dervish just stood there, not making any comment at all. He didn't even try to work out who the arguments were. But all he did was walk up to each of them in turn and look them in the eye. And when he looked in the eyes of the goat herd quickly got down, took his little goat and ran off to his house, and he did the same thing to the farmer, and the farmer quickly picked up his rake and went straight up again to pretending it didn't happen. And the horse rider jumped on his horse and rode away. But then as the dervish was walking down the road, he had a thought. He thought to himself, So the question is, what was the dervish's thought? What was
Beautiful sunset. That's a beautiful sunset.
So, how does this tie in with the previous stories? The story about Kadir and his statement about objectivity, or attaining objective knowledge. We know that in this place that's being explored, that it fundamentally changes our relationship with life. How has it changed? And what has that got to do with objective knowledge or objective reality? We could even ask the question, what is our relationship with life now? So this question is posed. What was the thought that the dervish had as he walked down the road? What comes after?